Damian Cross didn't believe in coincidences, but that night, in a New York restaurant that smelled like power and threat, she showed up like a ghost dressed as a waitress, and her perfume was a memory he couldn't name. He was the boss of Manhattan's most feared union, cold, calculating, with eyes that intimidated and a smile that never promised anything but danger. But there was something about him that made him irresistible, the kind of man who didn't need to ask to be heard. Mara Duarte knew she was about to save his life, and by doing that, she'd wake a past they both tried to bury, a night in Chicago, years ago, when he saved her from a monster, and she ran before dawn after finding out who he really was. Now she had seconds to choose. Let him die or kiss him in front of everyone and change everything. This is the story of a kiss that saves, of a past that doesn't forgive, and of a love that's born only when danger decides to make room. Scene 1. Ghost Perfume, expanded version. The Vesper restaurant wasn't the kind of place regular people ate. It sat hidden on a side street on the Upper East Side, no sign on the door, no windows facing the street, just a discreet entrance with a doorman who knew exactly who to let in and who to pretend didn't exist. Inside, the air smelled like old money, expensive wine, and secrets that cost lives. There were few tables, spaced just enough so no conversation bled into another, and the lighting was calculated, low enough to create intimacy, but bright enough that every movement was noticed by anyone who knew how to watch. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like tears frozen in time, catching fragments of light and throwing back a golden glow that made everything look like an old painting, elegant and deadly. Damian Cross sat at the center table, back to the wall, always back to the wall. It was an unwritten rule he'd followed since he was 22, when he learned that men who trust other people's backs don't live long enough to regret it. He wore a black Armani suit with no tie, the white shirt collar open just enough to show he wasn't there to impress anyone. His dark hair was slicked back with discreet gel, every strand in place, like everything in his life. At 38, Damian ran the most powerful union in Manhattan, an invisible empire built on quiet deals, bought loyalties, and buried betrayals. He didn't need to yell to be heard, didn't need to threaten to be feared. A look was enough, a long silence, a smile that never reached his eyes. That night, he was having dinner with rivals, 4 men in Italian suits and polite smiles, each one representing a different faction, each one mentally calculating how much a well-placed bullet in Damian Cross's head would cost. They laughed politely, raised glasses of wine like they were toasting to peace, but everyone knew it was just theater, a choreographed dance where every step could be the last. Damian played the dance as easily as breathing. He met provocations with half-truths, smiled at the right moments, kept his hands visible on the table. But his attention was split, because something in the air had shifted. It was subtle. So subtle any other man would have ignored it. But Damian Cross wasn't any other man. He'd survived 2 decades in a world where distraction cost your life, and he'd learned to read rooms the way some people read books. Every detail mattered, every change in temperature meant something. And then he felt it. The perfume. Jasmine, amber, and something else. Something warm, slightly sweet, that clung to skin like a memory refusing to be forgotten. The kind of perfume that didn't scream for attention, but once noticed, became impossible to ignore. Damian didn't turn his head. He couldn't afford to look distracted in front of rivals. But his fingers, relaxed around the whiskey glass, tightened just a bit. A movement so discreet no one noticed except him. She entered his line of sight from the left, coming from the kitchen door. Simple waitress uniform, white blouse, black pants, short apron tied at the waist, dark hair in a low bun that left her neck exposed. She carried a bottle of red wine in both hands, slim fingers wrapped around the glass carefully, like she was holding something fragile or dangerous. There was something about her that didn't fit. Maybe it was her posture, too straight for someone used to serving tables, or maybe it was the eyes, dark, alert, sweeping the room like they were looking for something. Beyond empty tables. She moved with contained grace, but there was tension under the surface, like a stretched rope about to snap. As she passed by his table, the tips of her fingers brushed his shoulder. A touch so brief it could have been accidental. But it wasn't. Damien knew the difference between an accidental touch and a deliberate one. He'd built an empire reading tiny gestures. And that touch burned. Not physically, but in a way that made his body recognize something his mind couldn't name yet. It was like hearing a song you swore you'd never heard, but somehow knew by heart. "Mr. Cross? More wine?" Her voice was steady, controlled, but there was a slight tension at the edges, like she was holding back something much bigger than a simple question. Damien didn't look up right away. It was a deliberate strategy. Never react too fast. Never show that something affected you. He finished chewing, dabbed his mouth with the linen napkin, and only then let his gaze rise to her. It felt like a punch to the gut, not because she was stunning, though she was in a discreet way that made it impossible to look away, but because there was something familiar about her, something his body recognized before his brain could process it. Her eyes were deep brown, almost black in the restaurant's low light, and in them was a strange mix of fear and courage, like she was about to jump off a cliff and had already made peace with the fall. "Work and move," Damien said, voice low and sharp. "Don't stop at my table." It was a cold response, calculated, meant to push her away before any of the rivals noticed the split-second hesitation. But she didn't step away right away. Instead, she leaned in just a little, so little only he would notice, and her lips hovered inches from his ear. Her perfume intensified, wrapping around him like smoke. And when she spoke, her voice came out in a whisper so low it was almost a thought. "You've got 30 seconds. Damien froze. Not on the outside. On the outside, he stayed still, his face a perfect mask of indifference. But inside, every survival instinct he'd honed over 2 decades screamed danger. She stepped away before he could respond, but the perfume stayed, clinging to his skin like an invisible signature. And that's when, as he watched her walk back toward the kitchen, Damien saw, reflected in the polished surface of the crystal glass in front of him, a man leaning against the back column, hands in pockets, posture too relaxed to be natural, eyes fixed, not on the rivals, on Damien. Shooter. Damien's heart didn't speed up, it never did, but his mind was already mapping exits, calculating lines of fire, measuring the distance between life and death. 25 seconds, maybe less. He had 2 choices, stand up now and risk a bullet in the back, or wait and trust a waitress he didn't know. But that somehow his body recognized, and that's when he understood. The perfume, the touch, the voice. He knew her, not the face, not the name, but his body remembered. And for the first time in years, Damien Cross made a decision based not on logic, but on instinct. He waited. Scene 2, the kiss that breaks the game, expanded version. 20 seconds. Mara counted in her head as she set the wine bottle on a co-worker's tray and headed back toward the center table. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure Damien Cross could hear it. Or worse, that the men around him could hear and know something was off. She'd rehearsed this 1,000 times in her head, planned every word, every move, every second. But now, with the weight of his gaze on her and the awareness that a shooter was waiting for the right moment to fire, it all felt too fragile, like a house of cards about to collapse. 15 seconds. Damien's rivals spoke in low tones, laughing at a joke she didn't catch. One of them, a man with gray hair and eyes cold as ice, raised his wine glass and made a silent toast. Damien returned the gesture with the slightest nod, but Mara could see, in the barely there tension in his shoulders, that he was ready. He knew something was coming. He just didn't know what. 10 seconds. Mara stopped beside the table, her hands shaking a little, not from fear, but from pure adrenaline. She took a deep breath, forcing air into her lungs like she was about to dive into deep water. There was no room for error. If she hesitated, if she took even 1 second too long, Damien would die, and Kane would win. And she couldn't let that happen. 5 seconds. She bent down like she was going to whisper something in his ear, a gesture that might look intimate, out of place, but was actually the only way to get close enough without raising immediate suspicion. Her mouth hovered inches from his temple, close enough to feel the heat of his skin, the scent of aftershave, something woody, masculine, mixing with her perfume in a way that made the air between them feel heavier. And then, in English, because English was their language, the language of that night in Chicago 5 years ago, she whispered, "Stay quiet and trust me." 3 seconds. Before he could react, before his brain could process the command, Mara turned his face with her hand, fingers firm along his jawline, her thumb brushing his cheek, and kissed him. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It wasn't a requested kiss. It was a kiss that took what it needed, broke every rule, stopped time, and forced the world to pause for 1 impossible second. Her lips met his with an urgency that couldn't be faked, pressing hard enough to leave no doubt it was real. He tasted like red wine and something else, something dark, dangerous, that made her stomach flip in a way that wasn't fear, but recognition. Because she'd kissed those lips before, 5 years ago, in an apartment in Chicago, when he was a stranger who saved her and she was a girl who ran before sunrise. The whole room froze. Flatware stopped midair. Conversations died in throats. A waiter with a dessert tray halted in the middle of the aisle, eyes wide. Damien's rivals glanced at each other, confused, shocked, trying to figure out if this was part of a game they didn't know about or something completely off script. And the shooter, leaning against the back column, lost his angle. For 1 second, just one, his attention slipped. His hand, about to slide into his jacket for the gun, hesitated. His eyes shifted from Damien's head to the woman kissing him, trying to process what it meant. And in that second, Damien's security, Leo, posted discreetly near the kitchen entrance, saw the opening and moved. The shot came from behind. A muffled sound, almost swallowed by the room's confused murmur. The shooter dropped before he understood what happened, his body hitting the column and sliding to the floor in a slow, grotesque motion. A red stain started to spread across the white marble like paint spilled on a canvas. But no one screamed, no one ran, because places like Vesper weren't built for scandals. They were built to bury secrets. Mara pulled back slowly, her lips still burning, her heart beating so hard she was sure it would explode. Her hands trembled visibly now, and she hid them behind her back, trying to get control again. Damien stared at her, not with anger, not with gratitude, but with an intensity that made her feel like she was being taken apart, piece by piece, and put back together in a way he could understand. His eyes were dark, impenetrable, full of questions he wouldn't ask there, not in front of rivals, not with a man's body cooling a few feet away. But she saw a muscle twitch at the corner of his mouth, and she knew he was processing, calculating, remembering. "Detain the waitress," Damien said, voice low and dangerous like broken glass. "In my room. Now." 2 guards were at her side within seconds. They didn't grab her hard. They didn't need to. Mara wasn't going to run. She wasn't going to fight, because this was part of the plan. She let them escort her out of the dining room, past tables where patrons pretended they hadn't seen anything, past waiters polishing glasses with more care than necessary, through the glass door into the back hallway, And as she walked, she could feel Damien Cross's gaze burning into her back like an invisible brand. Because now, he knew. Or at least he was starting to remember. And Mara knew that once he finished putting the pieces together, everything would change. Scene 3. Locked room, covered truths. The hotel room was too elegant to be a prison, but Mara knew a cage when she saw one. Soft gray walls, a spotless king-size bed, a window with a view of the New York skyline. But the door was locked from the outside, and two men in suits stood guard in the hall. She didn't sit. She stayed standing, back to the window, arms crossed, waiting. She knew he'd come. Men like Damien Cross didn't leave loose ends. The door opened 20 minutes later. Damien walked in unhurried, closing the door behind him with a soft click. He took off his jacket, hung it on the back of the chair, and only then really looked at her. The silence between them was dense, dangerous, like a high-voltage wire swaying in the wind. "Who sent you?" he asked, voice low and controlled. "No one." Lie. Truth. Mara didn't look away. "I knew about the shooter. I knew you'd be here. And I knew that if I didn't do anything, you'd die." Damien took a step forward. "Why do you care?" "Because I owe you." "You don't know me." "I do." Her voice wavered for a second. "You just don't remember me." Something shifted in his face, a subtle line between his eyebrows, like a memory trying to rise from dark water and failing. "Who are you?" "Mara. Mara Duarte." She drew a breath. "We met 5 years ago, in Chicago. You saved me from a man who tried to drag me out of a club." His body went still, but his eyes moved, quick, calculating, remembering. "You cried on my shoulder," he said slowly, like pulling pieces of a torn photo back together. "And then you ran. Because I saw who you were. And you still came back. Because I saw who he was." Mara clenched her fists. "The man who tried to kidnap me that night? He was there today, at the dinner. He's part of the cartel that wants you dead, Damien. And he also killed my sister." The air in the room changed, heavier, more real. Damien studied her in silence, and for the first time since he'd entered, something in him softened. Not enough to be gentle, but enough to be human. "You risked your life for revenge?" "No. I risked my life because you're the only chance I have to get justice." He crossed his arms, leaned against the wall, and looked at her with an intensity that made Mara feel like she was being read, page by page. "If I help you," he said slowly, "you'll owe me again. And this time, you won't run." Mara swallowed. "I know." "Then sit, and tell me everything." Scene 4. Echoes of Chicago. She told him. Every detail, every scar. Mara spoke about Sophia, her younger sister who came to the U.S. full of dreams and died in a gang shootout in Newark. She told how she discovered Sophia's death wasn't an accident. It was an execution. She told how she tracked those responsible one by one until she reached the name that mattered, Victor Kane, right-hand man of the cartel that now wanted Damien dead. "He was at the club that night," Mara said, voice trembling but steady. "He's the one who tried to take me. You showed up before he could. And I ran because when I saw your name in the wallet, I knew you were dangerous. But Kane is worse. He doesn't kill for business. He kills because he likes it." Damien listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stayed quiet for a long time, eyes fixed on the skyline lit by the city. "Do you have proof?" he asked finally. "I have names, dates, places, but not enough for the police to care." "Then we'll make them care." Damien turned to her. "But there's a price." "What is it?" "You stay with me, under my protection, until this is over." Protection or prison? "Depends on you." Mara looked at him. There was something in the way he looked at her. It wasn't desire, not yet. It was recognition, like he was finally piecing together a photo that had been tucked away too long. "Why did you run?" he asked suddenly, softer. "That morning. Why didn't you stay?" She hesitated. "Because I was afraid that if I stayed, you'd hurt me." "And now?" "Now I know you're the only person who can help me not get hurt again." Damien took a step toward her, stopped inches away, close enough for her to feel his heat, far enough not to invade. "I'm no hero, Mara. I know. And this might cost you more than you think. I know that too." He lifted his hand slowly and touched her face lightly, a brief, almost gentle touch that contrasted with everything he represented. "Then welcome to hell," he murmured. Scene 5. Alliance Under Fire. The days that followed were a dance between strategy and danger. Damien put together a meticulous plan, use Mara as bait to expose Victor Kane and track the cartel from the inside out. But for that, she'd need to be by his side publicly, as if they were lovers, as if there were something real there. It was a lie. It had to be a lie. But every time he touched her, a hand at her back to guide her, his fingers brushing hers as he passed a glass, Mara felt the line between pretending and truth getting dangerously thin. They met every night in his office in Tribeca, a loft with glass walls and minimalist furniture that screamed control. Damien worked with a small, loyal team: Marco, his right hand; Diane, the hacker who tracked accounts and movements; and Leo, the guard who never smiled. Mara proved to be more than a victim out for revenge. She had a sharp eye for detail, a photographic memory, and a courage that impressed even Marco. "She's good," Marco said one night, while Mara analyzed photos of suspects. "Better than half our team." Damien didn't answer. He just watched Mara from across the room, the computer light illuminating her focused face, and something in him, something he'd kept locked up for years, started to crack. That night, when everyone had left, Mara stayed. "Why do you do this?" she asked suddenly. "Why help me?" Damien lifted his eyes from the papers. "Because Kane is my enemy, too." "That's not all." "No." "So what is it?" He stood, walked to the window, and turned his back to her. "That night in Chicago, when I took you home, you cried. And I didn't know what to do. I never know what to do when someone cries." He paused. "But for the first time in a long time, I wanted to know." Mara felt her heart squeeze. "And when you ran in the morning," he went on, "I was relieved. Because it meant I didn't have to figure it out." He turned to her, dark eyes full of a vulnerability he rarely showed. "But now you're back, and I still don't know what to do with that." Scene 6. Unspoken Jealousy. The operation was in motion. Damien set up a dinner with investors, a front to lure Kane and force him to expose himself. Mara would be there, by his side, as his date. But before the dinner, there was a problem. One of Damien's men, a new recruit named Travis, made an inappropriate comment about Mara during a meeting. Something about the waitress who now warms the boss's bed. The room went silent. Damien didn't yell, didn't threaten. He just walked up to Travis, stopped in front of him, and said, with a calm that made the air go cold, "Say it again." Travis went pale. I didn't mean—" "Say it again," Damien ordered. "I apologize, sir." "Not to me." Damien pointed at Mara. "To her." Travis turned, ashamed, and muttered an apology. Mara accepted with a nod, but the look she gave Damien was full of something he couldn't name. Later, when they were alone, she confronted him. "You didn't have to do that." "I did." "Why?" Damien looked at her. "Because no one talks about you like that." "I can defend myself." "I know you can." He stepped forward. "But while you're here, you don't have to." Mara felt something break inside her, something she'd kept protected for a long time. "Are you jealous?" Damien didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, he lifted his hand and tucked a strand of hair from her face. I don't know what I'm feeling, he admitted, but whatever it is, it's making me dangerous. Scene 7. Rehearsal for pretending. Sensory intimate scene. You need to look comfortable with me. Damien's voice cut through the loft silence like a sharp blade. He was leaning against the work table, arms crossed over his chest, the dark gray suit minus the jacket, just a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, revealing defined muscles and a discreet tattoo Mara had never noticed before. A lion, of course. She was on the other side of the room, near the glass window that looked out over New York's lit-up skyline, trying to seem more confident than she felt. The night outside was a sea of lights, yellow, white, red, blinking like stars trapped in concrete. But Mara couldn't focus on them, not when he was looking at her like that. I am comfortable, she answered, but her voice came out too tight, too sharp, betraying the lie before she even finished the sentence. Damien tilted his head slightly, like a predator sizing up prey. There was no malice in the gesture, only observation. But it was the kind of observation that made Mara feel like he was reading every thought, every insecurity, every quickened heartbeat. You're not, he said, voice low and final. When I touch you in front of them, you tense up. Your shoulders rise, your breathing changes. They'll notice. Mara swallowed hard. She hated that he was right. Hated that, even after days working together, planning every detail of the operation, she still couldn't control her body's reaction when he got close. It was like her skin recognized his presence before her brain could process it. A tingling that started at the nape of her neck and ran down her spine, leaving a trail of heat she didn't know how to shut off. So what do you suggest? She asked, crossing her arms in a bid to build an invisible wall between them. Damien pushed off the table, taking a step toward her. Just one. But it was enough to change the temperature in the room. That we rehearse, he said simply. Mara blinked. Rehearse? Touch, closeness. Whatever it takes to look real, he paused, dark eyes locked on hers. Tomorrow night, Kane will be there. He'll be watching you. If he suspects you're faking it, that this is all a setup, he'll disappear, and we'll lose the only shot we have at getting him. She knew he was right, knew they had to be convincing. But there was a difference between knowing that rationally and being emotionally prepared for what it meant. Okay, she agreed, her voice almost a whisper. Damien took 2 more steps toward her, slow, measured, like he was giving her time to change her mind. But Mara didn't back away. She stood there, hands tight at her sides, heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. When he finally stopped, he was inches away, close enough that she felt the heat radiating off his body, close enough that his scent, something woody, masculine, mixed with the faint aroma of coffee he'd had earlier, wrapped around her senses completely. First, Damien said, his voice raspier than before, you need to get used to the touch. He raised his hand slowly, giving her time to protest, but Mara said nothing. She just watched as his fingers neared her arm and touched, light, almost gentle, the bare skin just below her shoulder. The touch was like an electric shock. It didn't hurt. It wasn't rough, but it woke every nerve ending at once, like someone had flipped on all the lights in a building that had been dark. She felt a shiver run up her arm to her neck, and she knew he'd noticed. Breathe, Damien murmured, and there was something almost gentle in his voice now. Mara obeyed, pulling air into her lungs shakily, but it didn't help, because now he was moving his hand, slowly, so slowly that every millimeter stretched into forever, sliding his fingers down her arm until he reached her wrist. And his fingers wrapped around her wrist with enough firmness to be possessive, but not enough to hurt. Then he turned her hand, exposing the inside of her wrist, where the skin was thinner and her pulse thudded frantically. You're shaking, he observed, his thumb brushing lightly over the throbbing vein. I'm not, she lied. You are. He lifted his eyes to hers, and there was something new there. Not calculation or strategy, but desire. Controlled. Contained. But there. And I need you to stop. Because tomorrow night, when I touch you like this, you can't shake. It has to look natural, like it's the most normal thing in the world. Mara felt her throat go dry. And how do I do that? By getting used to it. Damien let go of her wrist and, in one fluid motion, set his hand on her waist. Mara held her breath. His hand was big, warm, fitting into the curve of her waist like it had been made to be there. He didn't pull her right away. He just left his hand there, claiming space, while his eyes watched every reaction she had. "Look at me," he ordered softly. She lifted her eyes and fell in. His eyes were dark, intense, full of something she couldn't name. It wasn't just physical attraction. It was deeper, more dangerous, like he was seeing through the layers she'd built over the years and reaching the version of her that existed before everything fell apart. "When I touch you tomorrow night," Damien went on, his voice dropping to a tone that sent chills across her skin, "you won't pull away. You'll lean in, like you want more. And what if I do?" The words slipped out before she could stop them, and the air between them shifted instantly. Dense, electric, like a storm was about to break inside that glass-walled loft. Damien didn't answer right away. Instead, his hand slid from her waist to her back, pressing lightly, drawing her a step closer until there was no space left. His chest met hers, and Mara could feel his heartbeat, strong, steady, controlled. "Then that's going to be a problem," he murmured, his mouth inches from hers. "Why?" "Because I want it too." And before she could process it, before she could list all the reasons it was a bad idea, he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't like the kiss at the restaurant, quick, strategic, driven by survival. This one was slow, deliberate, a kiss that took its time, asked for more, broke every rule they'd drawn. His lips pressed to hers with a firmness that made the world fall away. There was no rush, no urgency, just the heat, the pressure, the taste of him, whiskey and something darker, more dangerous, that made her stomach flip in a way that wasn't fear, but hunger. His hands moved, one sliding up her back to the nape of her neck, fingers sinking into her hair and holding her there, while the other stayed firm at her waist, keeping her against him like he was afraid she'd run. But Mara had no intention of running. She leaned into the kiss, her hands finding his chest and fisting in his white shirt like it was the only solid thing in a world spinning too fast. She could feel the tension in his muscles under the fabric, the heat of his skin through it, and suddenly, every part of her wanted more. Damien deepened the kiss, tilting his head to change the angle, and Mara felt a low sound slip from her throat, an involuntary, vulnerable sound that made her blush, even with her eyes closed. He felt it. She knew he did, because his hand tightened at her waist, and his breathing turned heavier, rougher, like he was losing control as much as she was. When they finally pulled apart, and Mara couldn't say who moved first, they were both breathless. Her lips burned, her heart hammered so fast it felt like it would explode. And when she opened her eyes, she found Damien looking at her with an intensity that made everything inside her clench. "That was—" Mara began, but couldn't finish. "I know," Damien said, voice tight, rough. He ran a hand through his hair, messing it up for the first time since she'd met him. "But tomorrow night we do it again. And this time, everyone will be watching." Mara nodded, still trying to catch her breath. But when Damien turned to step away, she caught his wrist. He stopped, turned back to face her. "And what if I don't want it to be just pretending?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy, dangerous, full of promises neither of them was ready to make. Damien looked at her hand on his wrist, then into her eyes. And when he spoke, his voice was so low it was almost a whisper. "Then we've got a much bigger problem than Cain." He stepped away, grabbed his jacket, and left the loft without looking back. And Mara stayed there, alone, with his taste still on her lips and the certainty she'd just crossed a line there was no coming back from. Scene 8. The Dinner of Masks. LeBlanc was even more elegant than Vesper. Everything about it screamed exclusivity: spaced tables, soft lighting, and a guest list that included politicians, businessmen, and criminals who wore expensive suits to hide their dirty hands. Mara walked in beside Damien, wearing a simple but elegant black dress that highlighted every curve with subtlety. Her perfume, that jasmine with amber, floated in the air like a warning. Heads turned, conversations quieted, and Victor Kane, seated at the back table, lifted his eyes and smiled. Damien set his hand at Mara's back, guiding her to the main table. Every touch was calculated, every look a message. They were on stage, and the audience was watching. "You look beautiful," Damien murmured in her ear as he pulled out her chair. "You look convincing," she whispered back. "Who said I'm faking?" Mara felt her heart skip a beat. Dinner went on normally, polite conversation, polished laughs, wine glasses raised. But Mara felt Kane's eyes on her like a shadow. He recognized her. She could see it in the way he tilted his head, in the slow smile that spread across his face. And then he stood and came to their table. "Damien Cross," Kane said, voice smooth as poison. "What a surprise to see you here. And with company." Damien didn't stand. He only tipped his head. "Kane, and the lady is?" Before Damien could answer, Mara lifted her gaze and smiled. A sweet, innocent smile that hid the storm inside her. "Mara," she said. "Pleasure." Kane extended his hand. She took it, holding his gaze a second longer than necessary. "The pleasure is mine," Kane said, but there was something dark in his eyes. He knew her. She knew that. When he walked away, Damien set his hand over hers, giving a light squeeze. "You're shaking," he murmured. "I'm angry." "Use it, but not now." She took a breath and nodded. Dinner ended without incident, but as they were leaving, Kane paused at the door and sent Mara one last look, a look that said, "I know who you are." Scene 9. The trap closes. "He recognized you." Damien sat on the leather sofa in the loft, a drink in hand, eyes fixed on Mara. "I know," she said, pacing. "He's going to come after me." "Exactly." Damien stood. "And that's what we're counting on." In the days that followed, Damien's team set the perfect trap. Using Mara as bait, they laid a trail of clues that led Kane to believe she was alone, vulnerable, ready to be silenced. Mara hated the idea of exposing herself, but she hated more the idea of leaving Kane alive. "You won't be alone," Damien promised. "I'll be there. The whole time. And if something goes wrong?" He held her face in both hands, forcing her to look at him. "Nothing's going to go wrong. I won't let it." She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe. Scene 10. Showdown in the warehouse. The trap was set in an abandoned warehouse in Brooklyn. Mara walked in alone, heart pounding so loud she was sure Kane could hear it. He appeared minutes later, flanked by two goons. "Mara Duarte," Kane said, his voice echoing in the empty space. "I knew you'd come back. Girls like you always do." "Girls like me don't forget," she answered, steady. "Your sister was weak. So are you." Rage exploded inside her, but before she could react, Damien stepped from the shadows. "But I'm not." Kane turned, eyes widening. "Cross." "Game over, Kane." What happened next was fast. Damien's team emerged from the dark, guns trained. Kane tried to run, but it was too late. The authorities, bought and handled, arrived within minutes. Kane was arrested, his accounts were frozen, his network dismantled, and Mara, for the first time in years, felt like she could breathe. Scene 11. The price of freedom. It's over, Damien said, leaning against the loft window. It's over, Mara repeated. But the word felt heavy. She knew what came next. Knew that now Kane was out of the way, there was no reason for her to stay. I'm leaving tomorrow, she said, voice low. Damien didn't turn. Where to? I don't know. Far. Why? Because this, she pointed between them, this can't be real. Not in your world. Finally, he turned to face her. Who said it can't? Mara felt tears sting her eyes. Damien, stay. I can't. Why not? Because I'm going to love you, and you're going to hurt me. He crossed the room in 3 strides and held her face. Then let me love you back, and we'll hurt together. She cried, and he kissed her. But the next day, she left. 6 months later, Mara was working at a small bookstore in Lisbon, serving coffee and rearranging shelves. Life was simple, quiet, safe. And then, one day, the door opened. Damien Cross walked in, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on her. You found me, she said, unsurprised. I never stopped looking. He crossed the bookstore and stopped in front of her. Stay with me, he asked. For real. No masks. No games. Mara smiled, tears running down her face. Yes. And when he kissed her, it felt like coming home.